Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principal. Boy, have we got a treat for you today. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on all the socials at Jethro Jones. And today, I am doing something a little bit different. About a year and a half ago, my friend Danny Bauer and I decided to write a book called Reject the Premise. And we started it, and then it fizzled. We're not going to go into all that, but sometimes that happens. So what we decided to do was to resurrect this idea and do it as a podcast and then write the book. So we're going to riff on some ideas. In fact, we've already done it. The first episode went out on Danny's podcast, Better Leaders, Better Schools. You can go check it out there. But today, we're going to talk about the second group. If you look in the show notes at transformativeprincipal.org, you'll see a link to his podcast. You can go listen to that and definitely subscribe to it if you haven't. And then today, we're going to talk about some other topics, and we will get into those here in just a moment. So, Danny, how did it feel after doing our first episode on this Reject the Premise book?
Yeah, thanks, Jethro. I think it felt good. It was a lot of fun, riffing with you. I titled it Do School Different Part 1, so maybe this is Do School Different Part 2. It's up to you.
Excellent. Okay.
But I figured that way we could stay really organized. Yeah, but the thing is, right, you do work and the time wasn't right, and the approach didn't feel necessarily right. And kudos to us for wanting to give it some space, let it breathe, and walk away. I think a lot of leaders make a mistake when they get to that point and they're not feeling right in rhythm or just aligned or in flow, right? And what do? They work harder and they put in more hours. That's stupid. Don't do that. And so we said, we give up, right? At least for now. And maybe we'll come back. And then we had a chat, and now we're here back. This feels easy. So, there's leadership lessons there. This feels easy to us. We'll do the riffs, and then we'll take our riffs and turn that into a book and edit it up, organize it nicely. But yeah, it feels great. So thanks for asking.
Yeah. And this is really key that I want to reiterate, that we could have tried to force it, and a lot of times you have to force things. Other times you need to be in flow, and it's okay and smart to figure out when the right thing is to do what. Like when I don't want to go to the gym, I need to force it and go to the gym, because that's going to pay dividends later on down the road. Us forcing ourselves to write this book, I do not think would have paid dividends and would not have been the right choice. So we gave it some space and just said, hey, we're not going to do it, and that's okay. And that's what you got to decide. And there's not like a formula where you can say, here's the exact right way to do it every single time. You got to be able to say, in this moment, what's the right thing to do for where we're at and what we're trying to do. And that applies to anything that you're trying to lead. And you got to see where your people are at and what they're capable of and all that. So first one that we're going to get into today is this idea of, if you don't like someone, then move them out. And we recently published a satirical article about a principal who came into a new school. Things weren't going well, so she wants to fire the custodian. Now, I'm bringing this up because I've seen this playbook so many times, and the custodian is the one who gets the short end of the stick because they're an easy target. They don't have the same protections that teachers do,
right.
And a principal who's really struggling in a new situation will go in and get rid of the custodian just because she's struggling somewhere else. And it's tragic when it happens. And in the principals that I've coached, I've seen this happen numerous times, also with the principal that I worked with and with other principals that I've seen. And it's it's just really tragic. So the premise is, if you don't like them, get rid of them, or move them. And that's been the way that people have acted in the past. That's what we reject, and we say, find a place for the people to help them achieve their goals and be in the best place possible for them. What would you add there?
Well, first, you're referencing an article on the Substack. So that's ruckusmakers.substack.com if you want to check that out. And it is sad that people get moved out just because folks don't know how to lead. They don't like whatever. My buddy Gene Park, who leads an elementary school, he and the custodian go to different classrooms and sing happy birthday to the kids, right? And, the satirical article was actually based on real life. We won't mention where and when and all that kind of stuff. But that's the thing, is satire often has a seed of truth there, which makes it sting that much more. And, when you have a custodian who's great at developing relationships with kids and that kind of thing, what are you doing trying to move them out? This makes zero sense, right? And I think in the article we had them, getting written up for like talking to kids or just ridiculous stuff. But this happens. Another satirical article we had also is about the Secretary of Education announcing Wrestle Ed, right? Because we all like to put Ed at the end because it's like, really, really unique and creative. But with Wrestle Ed, there's last principal standing evaluations, right? Replacing Teacher of the Year awards with championship belts. And, it's absolutely outrageous, right? But that's the thing. There's the Jim Collins idea that people have in their minds, right? They read, I don't know if it was Good to Great, Great to Greater, Great to the Best, or whatever. Like, there's a lot of those books. And it is a good idea, Do people have a seat on the bus, and are they on the right seat, right? And I think the knee-jerk reaction for play it safe principles is, oh, this person doesn't necessarily believe everything or have the same point of view, and so they're not on the right seat and they're not on the right bus. We're moving them out. I think the big idea that we want to share, at least from my perspective, is that pause for a second, right? Try to understand where these people are coming from. Obviously, if they're doing bad things, with students, or they're completely ineffective as a teacher, let's say, that's one thing. But if they're just questioning and not on board with the vision just yet, slow your roll. Because critics can be cheerleaders and enemies can be evangelists if you approach them with curiosity and empathy. Listen to what they have to say. They're giving you the roadmap for professional development. And if you take them seriously, a few things are going to happen. One, they're going to be shocked. They're not going to believe that, oh my gosh, this principal actually listens to me, right? Because they probably have gone through their career just being shut down. Secondly, when you develop training around valid concerns, not all of them might be valid, but some will be, and they become a believer, everybody else is going to fall in line, right? You're going to pick up a good percentage of your staff that already wasn't the early adopters. So I think those are some big ideas when it comes to moving people out, because slow down, like you just got there. Let's really think about what they're saying and see if we could collaboratively build. So we're not saying don't fire or don't move out, just don't do it so fast.
Well, and the other part is don't write someone off also. And so we may not actually take any action, but we may write them off in our heads too quickly. And we may say, this person's never going to get on board. They're not going to do it, whatever. And I had a teacher at one of my schools who seemed to be against everything that we were doing. And she was constantly saying, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. And because I had learned previously that I don't need to convince her and that I don't have to change her, I need to evaluate, is she moving in the same, or is she facing the same direction? Or is she rowing the boat in the opposite direction? That's what I need to determine. She wasn't doing those things, so I let her do her thing. I let her ask questions. I let her poke holes in what we were trying to do. And what she actually did was she helped us figure out the problems that we had and helped us identify weaknesses that we didn't understand otherwise because we were totally bought into the vision. She was facing the same way. She wasn't antagonistic, but she was just like, you got to prove it to me. I'm not sold on this yet. And so by us respecting that, by us understanding that, we allowed her to be herself and express herself and be able to do the things she needed to. Now, I got to share this one story because it's one of my favorite stories ever. We had a custodian, this school where the principal tried to get rid of him, and he was just terrible with names. And the culture in our district was you need to know everybody's name. And for him, with 600 kids in the school, it was just too much.
The principal or the custodian?
The custodian.
Okay.
So he was just overwhelmed. Yeah. And it was one of those things where looking at his behavior and his personality, I see why the principal wanted to go after him. But what he did every day at lunch was he would talk to every single kid in the lunch line, and he would do two things. One, he'd call them all Steve, and they would call him Steve. Steve wasn't his name, but he called them Steve, and they called him Steve, because that was his way of dealing with not knowing kids' names. But then what he would do is he would quiz the kids on their lunch numbers. And so he'd get them to memorize their lunch numbers, and he'd take their little card from them the first couple of weeks of school, and he'd say, all right, what's your number? And then they'd work through it. This guy was so supportive and had such a good heart, but because of whatever personality issues or flaws he had, the principal wanted to get rid of him. But he was there every day, building relationships with kids, helping them out. And those are the kinds of things that we need to really be focusing on. Yeah, he wasn't perfect. Guess what? Nobody is. And so rather than writing him off, we needed to recognize what he was doing that was great and bring that back. And the problem is we focus too much on personalities or their disposition, and we don't do the things that are actually going to help us grow and get better as a whole team. Now, I didn't draw anything for this one. Did you draw something for this one?
I couldn't find cards for this one.
Oh, all right. Well,
I have them for everyone else. I went through the whole stack.
Oh, how funny. Well, there you go. Sometimes that happens, and that's going to happen for me for sure. Last time I didn't have a card for what we had talked about. So, all right. Anything else you want to add to that one?
I think you were talking about kind of like looking at people through a strength-based lens versus what they lack, and their weaknesses. And here's the guy getting kids to memorize lunch numbers, which I'm sure is helpful, getting them through the lunch line and all this kind of stuff. And maybe he doesn't know all the kids' names, but I think this is where, like, in industry like education, you got to question and think about the system and do school different, because obviously for a teacher who's with their students, 150, let's say, 5 classes of 30 or whatever, every day, they should know their kids' names. And I was working with a campus where there was a teacher who didn't know the students' names. Now, I think that is quite a bit more challenging for a custodian who only, has passing by type of relationships, unless they're super, super intentional. And to know all 600, like, I don't know, I would question that a bit. But my point is he was adding value. And it sounds like he was working hard. And guess what? Something that a lot of schools struggle with, he was a custodian who was showing up, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've been to schools, it's, yep, they're not here, and there's turnover and there's chaos, and this, you want a clean campus. So because the guy's here every day and helping kids know their numbers, but he doesn't know all their names, you're going to get rid of them? That's stupid, right? Today's the day where I tell the ruckus maker listening that you're stupid if you're doing this stuff. So I'm happy to do that and be direct.
Yeah. How many people listening are like, I had to do something custodial related this week because my custodian wasn't there?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
People showing up is a huge thing for sure. All right. So that leads us to the next one, which is feedback sandwiches don't work.
I have cards. Cards for this one.
Excellent. And that that's the premise, is give feedback sandwiches. And the new premise that we're suggesting is be inquisitive. You may have something different there, but the thing about this one that that I love is we don't call a ham sandwich a bread sandwich. And we talk about the meat. And the meat on the inside of a feedback sandwich is crap. And so it's a crap sandwich, basically. That's what it should be called, not a feedback sandwich, because what you're trying to do is do something fluffy and say, hey, here's a compliment, here's a criticism, here's a compliment. That makes everybody feel like crap, and it just doesn't work. Right. And so it's a crap sandwich, not a feedback sandwich. Yeah. And anything other than that is manipulative, and it's disgusting, and it doesn't work, and people see right through it.
So you're going to work, and you're getting dressed, and you put on your Depends, and then you get to work, and you drop just a big steaming you-know-what in your pants. That's what you're doing with a feedback sandwich. Yeah. So today's a day to offend people, I guess. But it's
Here we go.
Research shows that it doesn't work, right? Feedback sandwiches. I don't know. Well, I do know why. Education. The best thing about educators is that they have a big heart, and the worst thing about educators is sometimes that they have a big heart. And so the feedback sandwich is because you don't want to hurt people's feelings. So if I start nice and get to the truth, the way people really have to improve, and then end on a nice thing, we tell ourselves a story that it'll all be okay. And that's not true. It feels disingenuous, and it's childish, and you're ruining trust in that moment. So unless you want to ruin trust, don't use a feedback sandwich, right? If you want to build trust, be what I would say is radically candid. This comes from a book by Kim Scott. We read that in the masterminds we have, and it's Radical Candor's an incredible book. She has a grid, right? And the two axes are just about how much you care, right? And how direct you are. And the sweet spot is being very caring and very direct, if you, I'll recommend to the person listening, check out the graph, Google it, just Kim Scott and Radical Candor, and you could see what the other quadrants are, right? I'm just highlighting it right now for sake of time, but, we'll just say I'll do one more, right? If you're very direct, but you lack the empathy and the care, you're a jerk. And we know people like that. And then there's, right, if you are not direct and you don't care, that's another thing. And if you have high care, this is, I think, a danger spot for a lot of school leaders. High care, but you're not direct, that's something else. So, again, do you want trust? If you want trust, have high care, high directness.
The other part about that is when you just criticize, then you're also not building trust. But when you're like, hey, here's the reality of the situation, and because I care about you enough, I'm going to, tell you the truth. The other part of that is you feel like you can only say so many negative things to someone. But if you have a high level of care, it doesn't matter how many negative things you say to people. You show that care in other ways and by being direct also. And it's not as hard as we think it is. And a lot of times we do this thing where we think, oh, I got to choose the one thing that they have to work on, or I got to really focus and choose the most important thing. And my strategy on that is express gratitude constantly. And when you're expressing gratitude, that's one of the ways that you show that you have high care. And so if you do that, then you're going to be all right in expressing these things. And the real challenge that people face is they're like, I just need to tell them what they need to do to improve. But it's not only that. You also need to recognize where they're being successful. But you don't do that. You don't recognize where they're being successful as a way to tell them where they're struggling, because that just doesn't work, and people see right through that all the time. Another way to deal with this is to ask a lot of questions. Be inquisitive and ask what's going on. Why are they making those choices? Try to understand first before you get your point across. Because the reality is they may have a very good reason for acting the way that they acted, and it may make sense if you saw the whole picture. because we don't see the whole picture, and we need to understand the bigger picture before we start saying this is how it has to be done. And most of the time, probably, they know before we know when they screwed up and made a mistake.
Well, I got a quote from Radical Candor. The best way to keep superstars happy is to challenge them and make sure they are constantly learning. And so that's something, to think about. And you do that by being direct and showing that you care. And the other just encouragement for the listener, act as if everyone's a superstar, call them into their greatest, right? And so, again, if you're coming from a place of strength-based and also calling them into something even greater, I believe people are going to respond to that. So,
yeah, because people want to. I mean, that's the thing. They want to be part of it, and they want to add value and be productive and do things that matter. And my visual for this one was two people stand there talking to each other with GQ and arrows going towards each other. Now, to be honest, I don't remember what the GQ was for. It was either good question or gratitude and then question, or maybe goal-oriented question. Honestly, I don't remember, so it wasn't that good of a drawing.
Yeah, mine is just showing, you think that the bad, right? Happy face, happy face, it actually equals a sad face in the end. So you see the arrow plus the heart equals happy. You think about any leader you work for, they were radically candid, right? They weren't, well, Kim calls it ruinous empathy. So when you're really kind, but you're not direct, you're doing the feedback sandwich. She calls it ruinous empathy. And like I said to the listener, right, people will not trust you. So the people that you remember, those coaches and mentors and leaders, they had a way of seeing what's great, but also calling you to a higher level. So do that and you'll be all right.
Yeah, very good. Okay, now it's time for the one that we have literally spent 20 years between the two of us talking about, and that is the premise that we're rejecting is operate in isolation.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is develop a network of support. Why don't you start out on this one?
Yeah, well, back when I started the podcast, September 2015, one of my early guests, maybe top 20. I'm surprised he came on the show because it was so early back then, and he was, a big author. But his name's Greg Sachicoli, and he wrote a book called The Enemies of Excellence. And to him, there were 10 enemies, but the number one enemy was isolation, right? And this isn't rocket science. If you think about school leadership, you think about anything that you care about, you think about your relationships, the more withdrawn and independent, right, and isolated you are, probably the worse off. We're built for community, we're built for relationships, and you can't see the spinach in your own teeth. People need to be able to call that out. And so, in the spaces that Jethro and I lead, there's great value connecting with other leaders because you get that kind of support. They're able to freely share resources, question your thinking, But on the subject of thinking, you get to see how other leaders think too, which is an incredible value. And you grow light years. You grow exponentially when you surround yourself with other people. It was Jim Rohn, the motivational speaker, right? He says you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And the second I heard that, I had to make some changes in my life, right? And I've never forgotten that quote. That's a good quote if you could hear it a couple of times and remember it a decade later. You know what I mean? And so thinking about that, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Think about who you surround yourself in a school. Obviously, you have your staff that you're gonna have there. But the thing is, to me, like the ultimate ruckus makers, the A players, top of the game, they don't accept that I am in this system and I'm only going to benefit and grow through what they allow me to have or what they give, right? People who are hungry, that are true ruckus makers that want to do school different, they make it happen, And so hopefully within a system, they're supportive and will give you PD opportunities and allow you to, put resources towards that network. But even if they're not, you either accept that and woe is me, or you take control of your life and your leadership and you make it happen. So this is not to say you have to work with me and Jethro. There's plenty of groups, right? But what it is to say is get connected, or what are you doing, right? Do not operate. This job is too hard. It's too hard. Get connected. Have a network that will be candid, right? And be compassionate, and will level you up.
Yeah. And so I started this podcast, Transformative Principal, because my district, I did not think was doing a good enough job teaching me how to be a kind of principal that I wanted to be, which was one that transforms schools. And so I was being taught to be a manager, and I wanted to be a designer of schools. And so I said, I've got to go find people who are doing the work that I want to do and connect with them. And then later, started doing the mastermind, and I saw something completely different. What I saw were these people who were totally alone, who felt like they didn't have support from anybody around them, talking to people. And the thing that people say the most, because at the end of every mastermind call, I ask, what was most valuable to you today? And pretty much 98% of the time, it's been knowing that I'm not alone in this. So people all over the country, different places, even the world, because we've had some international folks, saying, I'm dealing with the exact same things that other people are dealing with, and I thought I was all alone. And like, if you think you're all alone and you're struggling with that, then you got to go find some support. And there's lots of places you can go, that's for sure. But find some support so that you're not alone. And the picture that I drew for this one, I really like, because it's a bunch of interconnected dots, and there's a problem dot that is connected to a bunch of different things. And a few connections away, there are two people saying, I can help. And this is what's really powerful is you've been through things, you've had experiences, and the person that you know directly may not know the answer, but somebody connected to them may know. And I was just last week, I was meeting with these two different people, and they both were working on the same thing. And I was like, oh my goodness, you guys don't even know each other, and you are doing the exact same thing. You guys need to know each other and connect with each other, because you're not going to be operating in isolation. Right now you are, but you could be doing this together. And that is just amazing when you're talking and sharing what's going on with other people, then they can provide that support that you really need to do the work. And whatever your job is, it is hard. Like, it's tough to do it on your own. And so you do need support. So whatever level you're at, you need to go find that support, and nobody cares about it as much as you do. So you got to be the one to make the choice to go get it.
Yeah. Feeling all right? I know that chokes you up when you start talking about
it. When I get fired up, sometimes I lose my ability to talk. That was one of those.
I reflect on my life, and naturally creative, visionary, hard worker, right? And anybody who works in isolation has a lot of great positive qualities. Like you mentioned, your two friends working on the same thing, but independently. And when I started joining masterminds myself, getting coached and that kind of thing, that unlocked new levels of success, let's say. And the podcast has hit, a certain level, and best-selling books, spoken around the world, right, to crowds as big as 1,000. And have really experienced some really neat things that have happened personally and professionally. And I believe I just avoided $1 million mistake, to be honest. I won't share the entire details. But I was hearing over here one idea, right? And that's just me and somebody talking and kind of isolated. And then I brought that to the larger network that I have and said, hey, this is what I'm hearing. This is the deal in front of me. What do you think? And my mentors, right, in a coach call, there were about 6-8 of us. They're like, it's a terrible deal. Don't take it. And what my one mentor, Christopher Locke, had said, in business, there's missionaries and mercenaries, right? Missionaries are giving back, and they're doing it. They do it even for no money, right? Because they're so in love solving the problem. And then there's mercenaries, people who just want to get ahead, right? And make an extra buck and whatever. And so that was super great feedback. And then I was able to say, no, I'm not doing that one thing. And I believe it saved at least $1 million, right? Not in one swing. It would have been over time, but certainly that's that's what I was looking at. And it's only because I wasn't isolated making this decision, right? I had a network that I could run it by.
Yeah. And so that's a business decision. And so the other part of this is that you might need different networks for different purposes, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes some people won't be able to give good insight into a leadership decision versus a personal decision versus a family decision. And so being able to understand who those supports are that you go to for different things is also valuable. And I bring that particular piece up because I was asking a group of people for some advice about something, and they had no idea what I was dealing with. They couldn't wrap their heads around it because they weren't the right group to give support in that arena. Yeah, and point. So they still gave some support, but they didn't get the whole picture. And I had to do a lot of additional explaining to get them to see where I was coming from. And so they made a suggestion, and I was like, no, that just doesn't work. And so to be clear, I'll share it here so that people can understand what I'm talking about. It was about getting people to pay for the mastermind and how that works. And I was talking about it, and they're like, well, just do like these, you got to make this decision today or it's not going to work. And I had to explain, look, principals don't make decisions that way because they have a district budget. They have a process to go through. There's a bureaucratic system in place that has to, meet all these things. And so, the sales cycle is just really long. And they're like, well, then don't sell to them. I was like, well, that's like who I serve. And so I can't not sell to them because I'm not trying to help business leaders who have a budget and can do that just like that. Mm-hmm. I'm selling to school principals, and that's the whole point. That's who I'm trying to serve. So I have to play within the system that exists, even if that system is not perfect. And the reason why that was the wrong group to talk to is that they had no experience selling to schools. Mm-hmm. And then I talked to somebody who does have experience, and he said, oh, well, here's how you solve this problem. And he gave me such beautiful insight that was totally aligned with what I think and believe. And it was really, really valuable because he understood the context and understood what schools are trying to do and how to help them. That kind of talking to the right group really does make a difference.
Yeah, big time. Good point.
Yeah. Did you draw a picture for this one?
Yeah. Very similar to yours with the dots, right? So excellence, and you see, a person surrounded by support, and then the isolation is just you on an island, right? So, and to me, I talk about, you said, you could be just a good manager, and that's the thing. Play it safe principals are managers, they're not leaders. So, sorry, not sorry for saying that. And you're protecting the status quo. It's hard. You can't lead alone. You got to have a network. And everything that you've learned has been learned through probably like a binder or a manual or what the system has told you to do. That's because you're doing it alone. So if you really align with this idea that ruckus makers do school different, you want to reimagine education even within a traditional system, so that, listen to these words, so that you create a campus experience worth showing up for, you do that within a group, right? So find yourself a way to get connected, and that way you can create that campus of your dreams.
Yeah. All right. So there's our next three. This has been pretty good. I enjoy this approach. I think it's working well. So I'm happy we're doing it. So we went through 3 different premises that we rejected: operate in isolation, and we're saying you should instead develop a network of support; give feedback sandwiches, and we're saying instead you should be inquisitive; and if you don't like them, then move them out. And we said you need to find a place for people to best achieve their goals. So those are our 3 for today. If you are listening to this and you're like, hey, this is good stuff, you guys should keep doing it, that really helps us. So let us know. You follow both of us on social media. Give it a share. Give us a shout out and say, hey, this is nice. We like it, this format, and we're gonna keep going. Unless people are like, hey, this is terrible. You guys should stop. Then that's good feedback. You know, we're looking for radical candor. We want you to have high care and be direct. So let us know. We're not looking just for compliments. We're looking for radical candor. So that's us putting our money where our mouth is, and we really believe that. Any final words, Danny?
I just thank you for the opportunity. It's good to connect again, and then we'll see everybody in part 3 back on my show.
Yep. So once again, part 1 on Better Leaders, Better Schools. The link is in the show notes. Part 2 is on Transformative Principal. That's here. And part 3 is going to go back to him. And then all the odd ones are going to be on his, and all the even ones are going to be on mine. And we're just going to keep doing this. And we don't have like a perfect release schedule. So it's not like these are all going to be in line or like every week or whatever. We're going to release them as it makes sense. And that's it. So I hope you enjoy this. Eventually, I'm sure we will put them all in one place. But for right now, this is what it's gonna be. So thank you for listening to Transformative Principal. Thank you for being here, Danny. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week.